The first time my wife handed me that cup, I didn't even take a sip because the tea smelled wrong, like someone tried to hide something bitter under honey, and the second I looked up, she was watching my mouth instead of my eyes. My name is Orson Vale, my wife is Eloane Suttervale, and if you've ever been in a marriage where love feels slightly rehearsed, you know exactly what I mean when I say the room suddenly felt staged. Eloane had been sweet lately, too sweet, packing my lunch, laughing at jokes she used to roll her eyes at, touching my shoulder like she was reminding herself to perform affection. That night her sister, Zephyr Sutter, was visiting again, the same sister-in-law who treated my home like a hotel and my patients like a joke. Zephyr sat at the counter scrolling and smirking, throwing little comments like darts about my job, my routines, my paranoia, always laughing in a way that made me feel like the punchline. Eloane brought in a tray with 2 cups and a small plate of cookies, smiling like this was normal, like we were a cozy family in a commercial. "I made your favorite," she said, and slid 1 cup toward me. The steam rose, but the scent wasn't chamomile or mint or anything comforting. It was sharp, faintly chemical, faintly medicinal, like a cleaning cabinet pretending to be a kitchen. I kept my face neutral and lifted the cup as if I was about to drink, and Eloane's gaze locked onto the rim with an intensity that made my skin tighten. Zephyr snorted. "Oh my God, just drink it. You always act like the world's out to get you." Eloane laughed too quickly. "He's just tired." I smiled back and said, "You're right. I am tired." Then I did something small, quiet, almost casual. I set my cup down beside Zephyr's, turned to grab a napkin, and in the motion of normal life, I switched the cups like it was nothing, like I didn't even notice. Zephyr, eager to prove a point, grabbed the cup that used to be mine and took a big sip to show me how dramatic I was. Eloane's smile froze for half a heartbeat, and in that half heartbeat, I knew the smell wasn't an accident. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. At first, Zephyr acted smug, rolling her eyes as she drank, like she'd just won some childish contest, and Eloane tried to recover, laughing and saying, "See? It's fine." But her voice sounded thin, like a string pulled too tight. Within minutes, Zephyr's expression shifted from arrogant to confused. She blinked hard, rubbed her forehead, and complained that the room felt weird, like the air was heavier. She stood up too fast and had to catch herself on the counter, then snapped at me, angry, irrational, because it was easier to accuse me than admit something was happening to her body that she couldn't control. Eloane stepped forward quickly, hands half raised, saying, "Maybe you didn't eat enough today." But she didn't look at Zephyr's face, she looked at the cup. That detail mattered. People check faces when they're worried about health. People check cups when they're worried about evidence. Zephyr's speech started to slow, her eyelids dipping like someone was pulling them down, and she kept saying she just needed to sit. My heart was pounding, but my mind was strangely calm, the way it gets when the truth stops being theoretical. I didn't gloat. I didn't reveal I switched anything. I just moved into action, because no matter how annoying she was, I wasn't going to let someone collapse in my home while Eloane pretended this was normal. I got Zephyr water and told her to stay upright, and I called for medical help, choosing my words carefully. Sudden dizziness, unusual drowsiness, possible exposure to something unknown. Eloane hovered in the background, wringing her hands, offering useless suggestions, and every suggestion was designed to get rid of the cup. "Let me rinse that. I'll throw it out. It's probably nothing." I stopped her with one sentence. "Don't touch anything." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Zephyr sank onto the couch, eyes glassy, breathing shallow but steady, and whispered, "Orson, what did you do?" That's the part that broke something in me. In her mind, the only explanation was that I'd done it, because nobody considers the quiet, smiling person in the room capable of harm until it's already too late. I looked at Eloane and said softly, "No. The real question is, what did you do?" And for the first time that night, she couldn't answer without giving herself away. When the paramedics arrived, Eloane instantly shifted into a performance I'd never seen so clearly before. The worried wife, the innocent hostess, the confused family member who just wants everyone safe. She kept talking over me, trying to control the narrative, insisting Zephyr sometimes gets panic attacks, claiming she'd been stressed lately. Anything to make this feel like a personal episode instead of an external cause. I didn't argue in front of them. I simply gave the facts. Zephyr was fine until she drank from a specific cup, the tea smelled unusual, and symptoms began minutes after. The paramedic looked at the cup, asked a few questions, and wrote notes that were colder than Alohan's smile. Zephyr was taken in for evaluation, still dazed, still irritated, still trying to glare at me through heavy eyelids like I was the villain in her story. Once the door closed and the sirens faded, Alohan's sweetness fell away like a mask slipping off a hook. Her eyes went sharp. "Why would you do that?" she hissed. Not, "Is Zephyr okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just, "Why would you do that?" As if the only crime was that I disrupted her plan. I kept my voice low. "I didn't do anything to her," I said. "I switched cups because your tea smelled wrong, and you were watching me like you were waiting for something." Alohan's face tightened, and she tried to pivot, tried to make it about my trust issues, my control, my paranoia. But she wasn't convincing anymore, because I'd seen her freeze when Zephyr drank, and I'd seen her try to get rid of the cup. Then she said something that chilled me. "You always ruin things." Things. Not moments. Not peace. Things, as if there was a plan in motion, a sequence, an outcome, and I had ruined it by staying alert. That's when I understood this wasn't a random weird tea incident. This was connected to something bigger: money, control, reputation, maybe even a legal setup. And Zephyr had been in my house so often not just because she was family, but because she was part of the environment Alohan used to keep me off balance. I told Alohan calmly, "We're not discussing anything else until I know what was in that cup." She laughed, but it sounded fake. "You can't prove anything," she said. And that was the moment I realized she wasn't afraid of truth. She was relying on the fact that truth is hard to prove when the person serving the tea is the one who controls the kitchen. I didn't sleep that night either, not because I was spiraling, but because every instinct I had was screaming that if I didn't move carefully, Alohan would rewrite reality by mourning the way she tried to rewrite it in front of the paramedics. While she showered and moved around the bedroom pretending nothing happened, I went back to the living room with a calm that surprised me. I photographed everything: the tray, the cups, the kettle, the tea container. Then I sealed the remaining liquid the safest way I could without contaminating it further, because the point wasn't to play detective for ego, it was to preserve a timeline. When Alohan came out and saw what I was doing, she stopped in the doorway and asked very softly, "What are you planning?" Her tone wasn't worried. It was assessing. I told her, "I'm planning to know the truth." She tried to step closer, and I stepped back, not aggressively, just firmly, like drawing a line she couldn't cross. For the rest of the night, she kept trying angles, apologies that didn't sound sincere, anger that didn't match the situation, tears that arrived too late. She also slipped once, just once, when she muttered, "It was supposed to calm you down." Calm you down. Not help you sleep. Not relax you. Calm you down, like I was a problem to be managed, not a husband to be loved. In the morning, Zephyr called from the hospital, voice hoarse, furious, saying the doctors asked about possible exposure to something sedating, and they were running tests. Alohan listened from the kitchen, motionless, and when I said I might speak to authorities if the results came back suspicious, she finally dropped the mask completely. "If you do that," she said quietly, "you'll destroy this family." And I looked at her and realized the family she meant wasn't us. It was the version of her life where she controlled the story, controlled the money, controlled who looked guilty and who looked innocent. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "No, you already destroyed it. I'm just done protecting the lie." And as I watched her eyes narrow, I understood the weird smell wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was how confident she was that she could make everyone believe it never happened. By the next afternoon, the call came in a way that immediately told me this wasn't going to be brushed off as stress or coincidence. Zephyr's voice was steadier than the night before, but the anger underneath it was sharper, focused, no longer scattered. She said the doctors had found traces of a sedative-class substance in her system. Nothing lethal, but strong enough to cause sudden dizziness, delayed reactions, and impaired judgment. They asked her questions she hadn't expected to answer. What she'd eaten, what she'd drunk, who prepared it, whether anyone else could have been exposed. She told them about the tea, about how Alohan insisted on serving it, about how I'd looked hesitant. When she finished relaying all this to me, there was a long pause, and then she said quietly, "Orson, I don't think that was meant for me." That sentence landed harder than any accusation because it meant Zephyr had finally stepped outside the role she played in my life. The loud, annoying antagonist, and saw the situation for what it was. Alohan wasn't careless. She was precise. The hospital hadn't labeled it poisoning yet, but they were documenting everything. And documentation is where stories stop being flexible. When I hung up, Eloan was standing in the doorway listening, pretending she hadn't been, and for the first time she didn't deny anything outright. She just asked, "What exactly did they say?" Not, "Is my sister okay?" Not, "How serious is it?" She wanted to know how much truth had escaped her control. Later that evening, Zephyr asked to see me alone. Not at the house. Not anywhere Eloan could hover. We met in the hospital cafeteria, the kind of place where everything feels exposed and honest because no one is pretending it's comfortable. She looked smaller than she ever had before, not physically, but emotionally, like someone realizing they've been used as a tool instead of a person. She told me things she'd never admitted before. How Eloan complained about me constantly, how she framed me as controlling, paranoid, unstable, how she joked about needing a break from my awareness. Zephyr said she thought she was helping her sister manage me, that she believed I was exaggerating concerns because that was the version of me Eloan fed her. And then Zephyr said something that made everything snap into place. She told me the tea was for you, she said. She said it would make you mellow. Easier. Easier. Not calmer. Not happier. Easier. In that moment, Zephyr wasn't my enemy anymore. She was a witness. She hadn't meant to drink it. She hadn't known what was in it. And now she was terrified, not just because she'd been drugged, but because she realized her sister had been willing to let anyone drink it as long as it wasn't discovered. I didn't comfort her with false reassurance. I just said, "Tell the doctors and tell the truth if anyone asks." She nodded, eyes glossy, finally understanding that loyalty to Eloan had nearly cost her something serious. With Zephyr hospitalized and no longer playing interference, Eloan's behavior at home shifted in a way that was impossible to miss. She became careful with her words, overly polite, watching me like she was trying to calculate how much I knew. And that's when the motive began to surface, not in a dramatic confession, but in slips. She mentioned my stress repeatedly, how doctors might say I was burned out, how taking time off work might be good for everyone. She brought up finances out of nowhere, suggesting she could handle things if I needed rest. The pattern was clear once I stepped back. She wasn't trying to hurt me physically. She was trying to control the narrative. A sedated husband is an unreliable narrator. An unstable husband can be sidelined. And a husband sidelined at the right moment makes legal, financial, and personal decisions much easier for the person managing the story. That's when I contacted a lawyer. Not to accuse, not to escalate emotionally, but to document. To ask the right questions. To understand how intent is proven when harm is disguised as care. Eloan noticed immediately. She asked who I was calling. I told her the truth. Someone who deals in facts. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just went very still, and that stillness told me she knew the ground beneath her was starting to crack. I didn't confront Eloan with everything at once because confrontation invites performance, and she was good at performing. Instead, I let time and process do the work she couldn't manipulate. The hospital documented Zephyr's condition. The substance report went into her file. My lawyer logged dates, behaviors, and statements. I preserved the physical evidence exactly as it was. And Eloan, sensing control slipping, began making mistakes, contradicting herself, pushing explanations that didn't match medical language, insisting everyone was overreacting. That word mattered. People overreact to accidents. They don't overreact to intent. Zephyr was discharged a few days later, shaken but clear, and she refused to return to the house. That alone shattered the dynamic Eloan relied on. Without her sister reinforcing the narrative, Eloan was alone with the truth she'd tried to hide behind charm and routine. I didn't threaten her. I didn't demand answers. I simply stopped protecting the illusion of normalcy. And when someone who depends on illusion realizes you're no longer participating, panic follows quietly. By the end of the week, Eloan wasn't asking me how I felt. She was asking what I planned to do. And that told me everything. Because someone who believes they're innocent asks for understanding. Someone who knows they're exposed asks for strategy. The shift from suspicion to accountability happened quietly, the way serious things usually do. A follow-up call came from the hospital asking to clarify timelines and access. Who prepared the tea, who was present, whether the same beverage had been offered to anyone else. Their tone wasn't accusatory. It was procedural, which somehow made it heavier. Procedures mean records. Records mean permanence. Eloan listened from the hallway again, pretending to tidy a shelf while every answer narrowed the space she had to maneuver. When I mentioned that the cup had been prepared by her and that she had attempted to dispose of it afterward, the line went silent for a beat, then the questions became more specific. Eloan didn't interrupt this time. She couldn't. The narrative was no longer hers to control. Later that day, a polite but unmistakably official request arrived asking for the preserved sample. I handed it over without commentary. I didn't need to dramatize anything. The facts were already doing the work, and the more neutral I stayed, the clearer the picture became. That evening, Eloan tried one final approach, soft, intimate, almost tender, sitting beside me and talking about misunderstandings and intentions being misread. She framed it as care gone wrong, as concern amplified by stress, as love expressed imperfectly. But every sentence circled the same point: how it would look if outsiders misunderstood her. Not how it felt to risk someone's safety. Not how close it came to harm. When I asked a simple question, why she watched my cup instead of my face, she didn't answer. She changed the subject. That told me all I needed. People with nothing to hide answer directly. People hiding intent talk around it. I told her calmly that I would not be discussing motives anymore, and that any questions could go through counsel. The word landed like a dropped glass. She didn't argue. She just stared, realizing that persuasion had run out and that performance wouldn't change the direction this was heading. Zephyr called me late, her voice steadier than it had been since the night she collapsed. She said she had given a full statement, what she was told, what she drank, what she felt, and the exact words Eloan used about the tea being for you. She apologized without excuses, not for being annoying, but for believing a version of me that made sense of her sister's plans. That mattered. Witnesses don't need to be perfect, they need to be honest. With her statement aligned to the medical findings and the preserved evidence, the situation stopped being ambiguous. Eloan's confidence evaporated after that call. She didn't rage. She withdrew, pacing less, speaking less, as if silence could undo documentation. It couldn't. Silence only made room for the truth to stand uninterrupted. I didn't celebrate when it ended. There was no victory in watching someone face consequences for choices they could have avoided. What I felt was relief, clean, unmistakable relief, because the fog lifted all at once. The marriage I thought I had was an illusion maintained by routine and manipulation, and once I stopped protecting it, reality settled into place. I took the steps advised, separated living arrangements, and let the process move at its own pace. Eloan asked once if we could start over. I told her starting over requires truth at the beginning, not an explanation at the end. The tea wasn't the story. The story was the assumption that love could be used as leverage and care as camouflage. I walked away not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted a life that didn't require vigilance to survive. And the quiet that followed, the absence of staged sweetness, the end of watching cups and reading faces, was proof enough that choosing clarity isn't cruel. It's necessary,